Space is the most mysterious thing to many people. We did get some information from space using cameras and other tools. No one really knows what's in space except for a few astronauts who've been there. Many people have heard astronauts say famous lines like Neil Armstrong's when he landed on the moon. This is a small step for me, but a big step for all of mankind. But a lot of astronauts have said something interesting or even scary. Their words might change how some people think about space. Even though space is interesting, it often makes us feel both amazed and scared. The sky and galaxies are some of the most beautiful things people have ever seen. Not everything in space is as exciting as it seems, though. Some astronauts have found out what lies beyond the vastness of space, and it'll give you chills. Join us in this adventure as we look at some of the most scary things NASA astronauts have said. Space music. Let's talk about the strange blackout of radio signals that happened during the Apollo 10 journey. Eugene Cernan, John Young, and Thomas Stafford all said the blackout was the scariest thing they've ever seen in their lives. This happened in 1969 when the mission's lunar module, Snoopy, was practicing for the historic Apollo 11 lunar landing mission. Eugene Cernan was in charge of Snoopy, which had one main goal. It had to get as close as possible to the moon's surface without hitting it, and it had to meet all the requirements. They also had to go around the moon's dark side. As soon as Snoopy could no longer see the Earth and began its dangerous trip around the moon, it lost all radio contact and went dark for almost an hour. The scientists were alone and couldn't talk to anyone else on Earth. And if you think about it, it was probably the time in their lives when they were the most alone. It'll finish its trip and come back to Earth in some way, but if you look at the astronauts' faces, you can tell they've been through something that has changed their lives. Eugene Cernan was shocked and said it was the weirdest and scariest thing he'd ever seen. Just the feeling of not being able to see or connect with the Earth. Eugene said that it was very hard to stay in touch with reality during the longest hour of his life because there was nothing in the spaceship but silence, darkness, and fear. When you really think about it, the only thing between you and nothing is a few inches of metal. The fact that no one knows why the radio messages stopped working for decades makes this trip to the moon even scarier. It may have had something to do with how the moon received or reflected radio waves or other waves. They think NASA shut down contact on purpose to hide data because the crew was having trouble. You are mysterious. There's no proof that it happened, but since the moon's magnetic field is so weak, the idea that the moon caused the blackout is also not very strong. Thomas Stafford, who was in charge of the Apollo 10 mission, said that it was the most isolated humans have ever been. He also said that even though he did a great job finishing the mission, the hardest part was staying in touch with reality. His thoughts kept going in different directions because he felt so alone in space. Every time he thought about making sure the move worked, he was reminded that they were completely on their own. The fact that the blackout would last a few more hours made what they said even scarier. The crew could have lost their temper, which could have caused the plan to fail and people to die. And to make things even stranger, Control didn't do anything. During the whole trip, the radio kept making strange whistling sound that the astronauts couldn't figure out.
That is music even sounds outer spacey, doesn't it? Do you hear that? That whistling sound?
Cernan called it strange music from outer space, and believe it or not, at one point they weren't even sure if it was real. Michael Collins, the pilot of Apollo 11, heard the strange whistling sound as he flew around the moon while Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong walked on the surface. Collins had already been told that it was probably radio interference, but he didn't believe it. He thought the whistling noise came from outside the spaceship, and in that way, he's right, because the people on Apollo 10 and 11 were inside their ship at the time. And Gordon? Well, he heard the whistle when he was on a deep spacewalk toward the far side of the moon. The quiet of space is scary enough on its own, but the fact that astronauts said they always heard the same sound is really unsettling. Snakes in space. Story Musgrave is a NASA astronaut who's been on 6 space shuttle trips for the US. He's also a doctor and a mathematician. Surprisingly, he said that on 2 space trips, he'd seen something that looked like a snake. He says these snakes are between 1.8 and 2.4 meters long, which is much longer than any snake on Earth. He said the snakes had been following him for a long time. Some people think he's having severe hallucinations, while others think it's proof that alien snakes exist. The first thing said was, "They looked at us on the moon." It's very hard to land on the moon, but the Americans have done it. People don't know everything that happened on the moon though, and some of it may surprise them. Most people who are interested in space know that Neil Armstrong's first words after landing on the moon were, "This is a small step for me, but a big step for all of mankind." NASA, on the other hand, said that during this trip, they lost about 2 minutes of contact. People say that in a secret message to NASA, he said, "Sir, these spaceships are too big. Holy crap, you're not going to believe it. I can promise you that there are other spacecraft here, lined up on the other side of the crater's rim. They're looking at us from the moon." People didn't hear these comments during the live broadcast, and Armstrong didn't say anything afterward, but multiple sources stated that it was him. UFO training. Gordon Cooper was a NASA astronaut who was famous for being alone in space for long amounts of time. When he was out in space by himself, he did a lot of different things and saw a lot of terrible stuff as well. Before he went into space, though, he had a lot of strange and scary things happen to him while he was in the Air Force. In 1951, he was in the air with a group of astronauts when he saw a fleet of UFOs that he couldn't identify. Later, in 1963, he saw the same kind of mysterious UFOs in a group at very high levels, knocking at the door in space. His name is Yang Liwei, and he was the first person from our country to go into space. He once said that he heard a strange sound that sounded like someone knocking on a door while he was in space. He said that the noise sounded like a hammer being hit against an iron drum. People all over the world who are interested in alien life and mysterious flying objects have spread this story. People often think it's about an alien creature trying to get on a rocket. Even though there are many ideas about what the story is about, it's more likely that the sound is caused by changes in the space environment, pressure on the spacecraft's materials, and a change in the pressure inside the spacecraft. Strange lights in dark space. In 2005, the International Space Station was led by an astronaut called Zhao Lizhong. He was a citizen of both the United States and China. He saw some strange things happen while he was out on the International Space Station. He said that while he and his friends were out in space, they saw a strange group of green lights. Zhao Lizhong said that the form looked like an upside-down V when he talked about how it looked. Zhao Lizhong doesn't think that these things on Earth are fishing lights, but some people who don't agree with him do. Thanks for watching this video. Stay tuned for more interesting information.